people are using AI and generative AI today. I think Salesforce recently did a survey to see how many people are using generative AI. And I think in the US, they had 45%. Pegged.
Oh, wow. 45%, yeah.
In India, they had 73% pegged. But what that tells you is the appetite to use it or the indicative nature is high. When you take that measure and then you look at what additional views you can see, you'll see that the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, are more actively using this. So what does that mean for us in the workforce, right? Because as my workforce evolves and matures and I get more people in, I'm going to increasingly have a workforce that wants to use this as a way of doing business. And so organizationally, everybody has to pull this into what this means for them and their business path forward. So this is very much going to happen. The key is, how do we as organizational leaders make sure we set the right structures and frameworks in place to accelerate it at our enterprise's pace and requirements?
Good morning, Archana. So good to see you. And thank you for joining the Vigilance podcast. This is my new podcast. And, I just have to mention how we met, because our dear friend, Debbie Wheeler, the CISO at Delta Airlines, just raved about you when it comes to educating around AI. Not a day goes by, probably not a conversation goes by without AI coming up. Obviously, the Fortune 500 CISOs that I serve are asking me questions every day across the board. They're all very worried about whether they're staying current and leveraging AI, and they have that competitive edge. And so I think this podcast is a good place to start, foundational. Where do we start? Where are we at? It's still really early days. So, but maybe let's start with you just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background.
Sure, I'm happy to. And look, a big thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. And Debbie is an amazing CISO and a good friend. And so I really appreciate and value her endorsement. I've been fortunate to be in tech all my life. And I've, done a variety of roles, right from being that engineer, growing up the ranks, being a CIO and a CTO a couple times, running a tech P&L, running pre-sales, running AI go-to-market, and now running here at AMD a lot of our commercial sales business. And so it's given me sort of a healthy appreciation of how valuable and impactful technology can be in the enterprise. And I've seen it firsthand, both from an implementation perspective as well as the vision aspect. And with AI and generative AI, what a fascinating time we're in. You talk about a technology with tremendous potential, absolutely tremendous potential, and we're only getting started. And as I've engaged around the world with, great technical leaders, with boards, and even CEOs, as I've talked to them, it's really fascinating to see how quickly they see the value, but it's also amazing to see the ambition everyone has with it. And it by the way, equally applies to the CISO population. The security leaders are equally excited and equally curious about how they can engage and drive this meaningfully. So it's just a wonderful time to be in. And look, anytime you have something this disruptive that can transform the business and the world in a material way, it's an awesome experience, and it's humbling to be a part of that story.
Yeah, no, that well said. I like the word ambition that you just said. That's very precise, in that and it comes from the CEO down. The CEOs are pushing. They see the competitive advantage or the automation that can result. And they're very ambitious. And then it trickles down to the leadership team, and everything falls in front of the CISO from a security perspective. So they're trying to be an enabler, a business enabler. So I guess maybe just a super open-ended question to start with is, how should the CISO be thinking about this today?
It's there's one word I'd use is enablement. A CISO should be really an enabler in this conversation. And what the CISOs should all be thinking about, and I guarantee you they all are, is how do you go empower your teams to innovate quickly with AI and generative AI? Almost every organization I've talked to, they have a multidisciplinary effort that's already ongoing. Whether it's governance, whether it's education, you think about like core alignment on what the strategy of use cases are going to be. This work is actively underway in all the organizations. And the CISO and their team should actively be plugged into these conversations. It's super valuable because once they're in these conversations, then it becomes about how are you contributing in a meaningful way to these discussions? How are you bringing both the responsibility the security team has and the risks that you see that you want to start to get ahead of in a meaningful way? And that's super valuable. And then the other dimension, Pam, that I want you to think about, and I've seen this firsthand, is people are using AI and generative AI today. I think Salesforce recently did a survey where they were looking at populations and they would get an online survey to see how many people are using generative AI. And I think in the US, they had 45% pegged. In India,
wow.
In
45%, yeah.
In India, they had 73% pegged. And now you can dig into it and say, are they using this recreationally? Are they using it day to day? Are they using it at the enterprise? But what that tells you is the appetite to use it or the indicative nature is high. When you take that measure and then you look at what additional views you can see, you'll see that the younger generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, are more actively using this. So what does that mean for us in the workforce, right? Because as my workforce evolves and matures and I get more people in, I'm going to increasingly have a workforce that wants to use this as a way of doing business. And so organizationally, everybody has to pull this into what this means for them and their business path forward. So this is very much going to happen. The key is, how do we as organizational leaders make sure we set the right structures and frameworks in place to accelerate it at our enterprise's pace and requirements?
Yes. And it's interesting. You just made me think about the bottoms up use cases. Yeah. Because the employees in the company and the Gen Zs and the millennials are using it. So that's kind of bottoms up versus the tops down, which is, the CEO or the leadership team who wants to have a competitive advantage or automate. And so both is happening. And they want safe enablement of Gen AI so that the use cases are many and everybody gets to participate in developing those use cases. But at the same time, how do there's the big worry that, people will, employees will accidentally share sensitive data in a Gen AI. There's hundreds of Gen AI sites. So any thoughts on how you, I guess, rope that in a way that, keeps the company safe and where is the good, do you have any thoughts on where, I know this is two questions, sorry, where is the good place to start? Do you take one use case or is the bottoms up approach better than the tops down? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that you can think of, right? The first is you have to strategically decide how you want to leverage this technology. And if the goal is to really leverage generative AI in its maturing form, because remember, these are early days, it's already showing tremendous potential. It will continue to evolve. So how do you take this and how do you take all the investments all the major companies are putting in a way that drives growth for you? So I think defining what success looks like for your organization is number one. And I've seen that, by the way, all the organizations are looking at it. The second dimension then is enablement, right? how do you enable your teams so that they are educated and they learn about what responsibilities are? The CISOs do this really well today, right? I mean, with all of the security responsibilities that team has and how they have to drive a secure and a security of work culture in an organization, they know how to do this really well. So their teams and those leaders become incredibly valuable, that as we learn this technology by being part of the core teams that are looking at this, they know how to stay ahead of everything that's coming and give their teams that perspective. So that's super important. The third is they're already working with companies like us at AMD and others, where we start to give them a perspective on how you go drive confidential computing. So how do you make sure that the data you have is protected and managed in a very secure way? These are things that they already do today. But then how do you make that a core part of your strategy? So that as you're designing for these, remember it's twofold. One aspect is the people that access it. The second is the organizational controls and the investments and the decisions you make to make sure that the right security structures are in place to protect the assets the way we need it.
Yeah, I'm going to challenge a little bit on it, because I agree the CISO is very good. That's their role, right? Is in business enablement. I mean, I think there's been a shift, to business enablement from the security space, but I'm not 100% sure that the tools have caught up, right? I had one of my CISOs say to me, it was great. He said, the only thing newer than AI is AI tools. And I thought, security tools, meaning, and I thought, is it a communications exercise? Where are the tools at? When do you feel that, how do you measure whether you're ready? Is it a committee-based approach? I do think being in the business of curating technology for large enterprises, I do think there are some tools for sure, but I do think it's early days still. And so, and it comes back to a risk management decision, like how much risk am I willing to take advantage of this technology? And so there's a balancing act. And in that balancing act, a lot of my executives are feeling, oh, am I behind? Am I behind? And I understand that concern because they're managing risk, right?
But, I think this is where I think you rightly said one thing, right? It's about balancing the advantages that generative AI brings and making sure you have the proper protection of your systems. And this is why I'm saying getting into governance conversations early, because I guarantee you all of the CISOs you talk to already have governance structures around data usage and privacy. I guarantee you they also have views on user ownership and responsibility. What they have to extend it to is how they interact with generative AI with those. The most common use cases you're seeing right now are how product management can start to use generative AI. So engaging from exactly what you said, right? Taking risk, taking the legal teams and engaging early on these are super valuable. A lot of the AI initiatives are in POC and maybe a few early scale opportunities. But engaging in those AI initiatives and just paying attention to what are the processes, what are the security controls you need to make sure you're protecting the organization and the brand and the capabilities of the organization in a meaningful way is going to be super important. The other one is, is also looking at, okay, how does generative AI help with improving security of an organization? A lot of the CISOs have SOCs that they manage today. Does generative AI and their investments, by the way, in products and tools that they're doing today for detection, for attack response, for incident handling, like how is that investment in AI also helping them be much more proactive in how they protect an organization? Right? So there's all many dimensions here. And to your point, I think it's not about am I late or am I first, but it's about am I using this in a meaningful way to meet the objectives my business has? And that's why lining up with the CEOs and the board's business priorities for the company are super valuable and important.
Yeah, no, I like that. And you make a really good point. I totally agree that, the the adversary is going to use AI to their advantage, but we are also going to use it in our security programs to our advantage. And that often starts with, or correct me where I'm wrong, but it often starts with data science, right? Like understanding the underpinnings of process. You said a lot of this. Hey, forget the tool. I'm not saying you say forget the tools, but leaving tools aside because they have to mature, and some are very mature and others not, but there's not a lot of choices of tools. You can solve a lot of these problems through process. It sounds like, security processes, and you analogize that to, the SOC and incident response. But we should be using to protect ourselves as AI, and I think having like a data science team and a data science team using certain AI models, because the other thing that sometimes gets confusing is we like to talk about Gen AI, but there's also models which are built on ML and AI that have a pretty big blast radius. It's almost two different, to me, it's almost two different pillars, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a little bit of context. My view, at least, is a lot of the debate on, the risks, the opportunities in this space tend to be about what the technology can do and what the technology is capable of or not capable of. I think we sometimes focus less that it's really human behavior and intent that actually shapes how technology is used. And so can the technology be used for a lot of good? Absolutely. Are there concerns that someone can use a technology for bad? Always. But isn't that our onus then to really take this technology that is so meaningful and materially drive the kind of growth we want to see in the world and the change we want to see? And that's the reason I always ask people to think about that as a pivot, is because then you're going to look at it as, how do I use this technology to enhance outcomes? And that's the beauty of it, right? If I can use generative AI to take my organization or my mission or my workforce and give them higher value, higher purpose objectives to work on, while driving the right outcomes, driving the right growth outcomes and the right optimization outcomes, I am effectively becoming a better, more valuable employee by leveraging it in a meaningful way. That is powerful. The reason I frame it that way is because once I frame it that way, then organizationally, every organization is different, right? Then I might say, hey, for me, maybe these are the 3 use cases that are materially meaningful for me first to drive immediate value for the business. And then it's very straightforward, because for the CISOs, instead of you saying, I'm going to do 200 things or 300 things, you're going to say, here's where I'm going to start to drive value first. And here's how I'm going to modify it and drive it. And they're able to weigh in and quickly see how we adapt. Now, the other piece, Pam, and you kind of touched on it when we connected earlier, right, is this is a fast evolving space. Look, we all know change is constant. We all accept that stuff changes for us all the time. But here with this technology, the incredible innovation we're seeing is at a rate and pace faster than any of us have ever experienced. And I personally love it. I love the fact that it's pushing the bounds of what we think can be possible. But the balancing act, I think a lot of the organizations, and one of the comments you made earlier, right? Hey, do this? People feel like they're late. It's because this is moving so fast. Everybody is trying to catch up with everything else that they have to do. And so the other piece is, it's not even a CISO thing. It's an organizational thing. Organizations have to rethink their ability and their structures of how quickly they adapt innovation as it comes through. And I think organizations that are going to start to have nimble structures that start to adapt and leverage this technology as it's evolving are going to see massive upside. Massive upside.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And I'm going to take a guess and say that if I asked my group of 50 Fortune 500 CISOs where they think they'll start, their organizations will start first, I don't know if my guess is right, but I think they'd say in code development. You said moments ago, product management. I'd like to understand that better. And do you agree that, code development could be, exponential?
I mean, I use product management as an example, right? But it's there are several themes that are emerging. Um, I think if you look at the most common use cases, like summarization is probably one of the most popular ones, right? How do I take a gamut of information from a variety of sources and have a summarized, cohesive view that I can look at? And most organizations are finding incredible immediate value in it. We're seeing that today. Productivity is one that everybody is trying to go look at right now. But productivity is two dimensions, right? It's one, what can a tool give you? But two, it's also how do you measure productivity? And that varies organization to organization. So I think it's as much a tool discussion as it is a organization structure, culture, and a KPI measurement discussion. Developer productivity is absolutely valuable, right? So when you're looking at it across the board, what is it that we can do? If you can now go tackle a roadmap faster, if you can tackle a roadmap faster with higher quality assurance and with reduced security vulnerabilities, that is tremendous value right off the get-go. And that's an example of where you'll start to see this progression and you'll see the adoption. So we're going to start to see this scale in multiple ways.
Interesting. I know the bigger umbrella there might be automation. Automation saves labor. Automation creates speed. There's lots of benefits to that. I wrote down summarization because I liked it so much. That's a great. I've not heard that, but it makes total sense. And I can even think of some applications in security where summarization has allowed companies to reduce risk because they understand their risk better because they have more inputs, right? It's a summarization. I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other one I just wanted to give you context on is it's less about automation, honestly. Like, I mean, we've been doing automation a while. So if you talk to a lot of folks in this, you know this well, right? I mean, even with ML, with AI, historically, people have been doing automation, and it's how do you try to improve maybe more productivity is that's the theme it gets to get caught up in. But really, what I encourage folks to think about with generative AI, and I'd love your perspective on this one too, right, Pam, is to me, it's about a better way of solving problems. And historically, when I looked at ML or when I used AI, or I saw teams put it at work, even in organizations I was in, we used to. It was a much more complicated problem that I was solving. I needed very smart set of people to go solve it, and it took a lot of work and a lot of training before I could get to the outcomes I wanted. And then we saw great results. But with generative AI, I can go take sometimes even those mundane problems that you kind of lived with, right? You kind of said, oh, you know what, that's just the way we do business, or that's just organizationally what we do, and we just manage it. Now I can meaningfully go solve it with not as much of a heavy lift. And so it's about solving problems a lot more easier, right? So that's the other shift that I think has a lot of value. And so we almost have to go in and say, how do we do work today? And can we actually just start to go solve for these in a way that makes better sense so we get to better outcomes?
Better outcomes. That's the key. I totally agree. I mean, we're always looking for ways to have better outcomes, especially in security, right? Because we're always 100%. Managing risk, right? So do we need a special group? Do we need a different talent group for this? Or can we use our own? Is it the current teams we have? Do we need data scientists? How does this look? I mean,
what you need is, I've always believed that a very successful organization is a learning organization. And a learning organization is where culturally you always are open to learning what's new and how you do things differently, and you challenge status quo every day. And so I think this is about the group that you have and the talent that you have, and how do you get them to embrace this new paradigm in a meaningful way, and how do they accelerate it to outcomes that you want? That's tremendously powerful. And when you look at all of the use cases some of the biggest companies are driving now, that's part of it. Is you'll see that if you see people doing more things today than others, it's not for any other reason that they have a workforce that's just rolled up its sleeves and is willing to learn and is engaging and embracing and testing and questioning and sort of evolving with it, right? I mean, you think about this, as this technology evolves, if as an organization I build my model to grow with it, it's tremendously powerful. And that's why I genuinely believe with the CISO engagement early and the CISOs being a core part of what the transformation looked like, the whole organization learns together, but learns from the experience it has and what it took to get there. And then it also has good lens of, hey, here's how we can use it in much more meaningful ways.
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of Gen AI sites. We started with OpenAI, and it just, but now there's a plethora of sites, hundreds, literally. And then there's the companies like Microsoft and Amazon who are delivering solutions with guardrails. And I don't know if you, or I even have one of my companies who bought a tenant directly from OpenAI, and they control everything that goes in so that they know that the data coming out is clean. That's probably happening more commonly now. But any thoughts on guardrails or, places that my companies should be starting? Or should it just be, go find your favorite site and experiment?
No, I think this is a perfect example. What you just said is a perfect example of how fast the space is evolving. I mean, I still recollect early last year when the only answer to generative AI was OpenAI. And you could hear all the other companies that said, no, we're all evolving. And then you saw Amazon come out with their Titan models. You saw Google come out with Bard. You saw this massive explosion of open source models with what Hugging Face is doing and other players. So you're starting to see a whole surge of these players. And now you have several players that are in the space, both proprietary and open source, that are building out these models. So organizationally, that's what I say is an organization needs to see how the space is evolving and start to build a very flexible model of how do we adopt this technology as it's evolving. And the more important thing is, are you picking the right model to solve the right problem, or a set of models to go solve the problem you have, versus you say, this is my favorite model of choice and I'm going to solve all the problems. And so that's the important thing. The other piece that you brought up, and this is rightly so, right? And I always tell customers this, and I've had customers ask me, they'll be like, well, how do I trust, or what should I do for the data, and how should I be comfortable if I roll something out? And I said, then test till you're comfortable. This is your brand. And if that means you need to test more times, then test more times till you get to where you're very, very comfortable with what you're seeing. But this is where I say experience and innovation are a potent combination, right? The experience the security teams have of an organization, they know what's going on in an organization. They know the maturity levels. They know the gaps. They know the risks. They understand these. They understand the governance maturity that they have and they're managing. When you take that kind of experience and you bring in this innovative capability, that's when they make decisions, right? That's when the decision is, hey, I don't want one model. I want a choice of models. Hey, I want to consume these choice of models in a secure environment. Hey, I want to make sure that as I'm training these models, my data is secure. Hey, I want to make sure that for every use case I use, I am seeing material outcomes, and I know the user population that's using it and how we're managing and measuring what good looks like. But all these become, again, so those decision items I just listed to you, Pam, you well know this. I mean, the CISOs use this, and the CIOs use this, and the CTOs use this in all their day-to-day structure of how they assess anything. So that's where the experience is super valuable. And when we pair them with all of the things this technology is capable of, then it opens up that aperture on, hey, how do I use this in a way that makes the best sense for my organization?
So you're saying, I think what you're saying is we already know, we already use methodologies in our business today. There's not some new methodology. This is new technology, and we're going to apply the same rigor and governance that we've applied to every other scenario. Is that true? Is it?
You evolve your governance, right? So there's governance the way you did it based on the technology you had. Yeah. But you have to recognize that most of the time our mindset when we think of governance is we are coming to some capabilities and we treat them as mature technologies. Hey, I'm deploying an ERP system, or hey, I'm building a HR information system. And those are mature technologies. You know what your guardrails are and how you predict it. This is a highly innovative, fast growing technology, right? So now you have to look at your governance structure and say, hey, in my governance, how do I recognize and how do I accommodate for my model choice selections? How do I pick the right provider that's going to give me a secure way to access a choice of models? How do I make sure I go do this? And what else do I need to stay ahead of? Like, what are my legal risks? What are my regulatory risks that I need to stay ahead of? Because the interesting part about all of this is all of these conversations are happening now. But typically, what we tend to do is we expect like a mature technology view. We expect everybody to have the answers. And some of these answers are being worked on now, right? Whether it's regulatory concerns, whether it's addressing some of how do we manage this. So it's important to be part of those discussions. And this is what I really encourage all of the CISOs is to be actively part of those conversations, because then you're able to shape it. You're able to also learn from it, and you're able to drive your organization to better outcomes with it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. And one of the things that I say a lot is this isn't completely new. I mean, AI ML models have been around for years. I mean, we're using them in cars and airplanes, and, the financials are using it at the edge. I mean, there's models of these AI models have been around for a while. We've maybe not had the tool set to manage them the way we are now because of the visibility, but it's not quite as new. I mean, Gen AI for sure is new, but the model part of it and building models, usually data scientist driven, isn't that new. And I sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of confusion on, what does Gen AI deliver versus building a model, which sort of mimics the AppSec world, right? It's now MLSec. It's now, building a model, it's like code, right? But then there's the models that are just available to us through Gen AI. And I don't know if I said that perfectly succinctly, but I think you get my drift.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is, hey, a lot of organizations, and especially the leading organizations that you talk to, have been using AI and ML and have been using AI and ML pretty pervasively across their organizations, and have probably very mature ML teams that have been doing some deeply meaningful work in their organizations. And they have been managing and scaling that in a very consistent way. I think the big difference is now you have the ability to extend the power of AI to every person that works in the organization versus a set of people that were driving it. And so now you're talking about a much broader audience set. And so it is an incredibly enabling capability, because you can go across business in a highly meaningful way. And it's also an incredibly evolving set, because you're also trying to say, well, what does my organization start to look like when I'm leveraging AI to the fullest extent? And so I think these are places where the conversations are active. I always tell customers this is, I said, look, you want to take your use case to scale, and at least one use case to scale, because when you take it to scale teaches you a lot. Scale breaks everything, and scale questions all of your environments. Because in a POC, 9 out of 10 times I put my best people focused in a specific problem they're solving, and the outcomes are very closely watched and managed. But when you're scaling something, the population you're scaling it to, the outcomes you're looking at, the measurements you're trying to drive teach you a lot. So scale is always super valuable to learn. So that's the piece that I think that's going to be the shift, right? Is from, hey, we had these, and how do we go change now? How do we take the talent and the energy and the work we were doing, and how do we build it? The other piece is it's about having a pervasive AI strategy for your company, right? And it's both classical AI and ML and generative AI. You have to use both. And because there are certain things that it does really well and certain things that you want to go build on.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, exactly. So I guess I'm going to try to summarize a little bit and say, I heard don't start with 1,000 use cases, start with a few, and where you can have better outcomes.
I mean, it's organizational appetite, right? And I'll say that because I've met with some incredible customers that have gone all in, and they are really like re-looking at their whole structure and saying, how do we materially do things differently? And so I think it depends on organizational appetite. But once you know your company, you know what the outcomes are, you start to scale it to grow that way.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that's interesting. I can think of the companies in my group that are doing that. And it's, it's their drivers are competitive edge.
That's
having,
right.
Pharma, travel and leisure, there's a lot of competitive edge opportunities.
Right.
So,
For
and that's,
everyone.
yeah. Oh, actually you're right, everywhere. And that's being driven at the top, almost at a committee level. But there's the consumerization with Gen AI we talked earlier about the bottoms up, which is also super interesting because, more ideas are going to be born from that.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting. This is such a great conversation. I feel like we're starting to run out of time. So I want to see if there's any final thoughts or, ideas that you would impart, in specific, because my audience is the CISO audience, on how to be that business enabler, and for and still manage risk.
I would encourage everyone again to think of how to enable this as quickly as possible within the organization. Data security, accuracy, and trust are typically the top topics that come up with a lot of the security officers that I talk to, and I'm sure that's what you're seeing as well. But they also have a lot of knowledge on how they've handled this in the past. And this is where, again, right from compute all the way to your application stack, what are the investments? Who are the players you're using? What posture are they taking to bring security to the forefront as you're embracing this technology is super valuable. I mean, that's what we do at AMD, right? Is how do we give you the best technology and the best compute environments possible and the safest way possible so you can own it and drive it. Similarly, there are other players who do it. So this is where it's again comes back to who are the partners you work with. Are the partners you're working with pulling in and having a point of view in generative AI and making sure that they're looking at the right return on investment for your use cases, the right total cost of ownership for the outcomes you want to drive in the most secure way, protecting your information and your brand. That's it. And when you have that sort of structure in mind, then you start to move quickly, right? You pick your partners and then you accelerate with them, and then great things happen.
Right. And I think too, and we talked about this earlier, having the security organization leverage Gen AI and AI models is the greatest way to learn on how to protect the rest of the organization as well. So get hands-on with it.
Absolutely.
And use it in your defense. So very good. Well, Archana, I so appreciate your time and your fabulous input. I know this is a hot topic. There's so many dimensions here, but starting with, let's not forget we already have methodologies. We've already faced these challenges in the past. Just be that business enabler. I'm trying to bring, of course, technology forward, but that's not always the answer. Process is a lot of it, I think, here too.
I think people more than anything else. I think people with the right mindset will make any process and many technology work the right way. So it's people are the ones that are going to take this thing forward in a material way.
I like that. That's a great way to end because my last podcast was with Jim Ralph, and we talked about people and KPIs and how people have to own those KPIs, and the underpinnings of those KPIs is process. And, we need to trust our people. I agree with you, to execute and to be responsible. We all own security. It's not just the CISO, right?
Absolutely.
So very good. Well, thank you again. And I look forward to having you back, Archana. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Pam. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.